Good morning. I'm Vern Klingman. I am 83 years old. I was born at Chapel, Nebraska on the family farm on December 21, 1925. That is the shortest day of the year, or as a friend of mine said, Klingman, any day on which you were born would be the longest night of the year. So I was born in Nebraska. I'm the youngest of 9 children born to William Klingman and Mabel Eichmann Klingman. Let me just recite to you our family history. From our best studies, we believe that our original ancestor came over as Philip Klingman with his wife Elizabeth and 4 children on the last day of September in 1743 to Philadelphia. Elizabeth was a second wife, and he'd had 3 children already by a previous wife in Germany, and so then they came here, and our ancestor from Philip and Elizabeth was his 4th son, Peter Klingman, born about 1752, and he's the one who was with Washington crossing the Delaware in 1776 and was wounded and froze his feet at Princeton and survived it, and married, and 6 years after that he married Margaret Engelhart at Trinity Lutheran Church in Reading, PA, and fathered 9 more little Klingmans. And his 4th son was our ancestor John, and he married Sarah Engelhart and had 4 children, but an only son, Joseph. And Joseph married Catherine Kurtz, and they had, I think, 9 children. And among them were either 6 or 7 sons. And his 4th son was my grandfather, Frank Klingman, who married Lottie Miller, and they had 6 children, but only 2 survived infancy, and one of them was my father, William. And then my father married Mabel Eichmann and had 9 children, and I'm the 9th. So that runs through our whole family heritage of that group. I have always been fascinated by history. In fact, that ultimately I got my doctor's degree in history. But I was always interested as a little boy when my father found a mimeograph copy of a family history beginning with Peter Klingman, and not knowing who the ancestry was beyond that. We knew that Mifflinburg was the family home because that's where my father was born, and they came to Nebraska when he was 3 or 4 weeks old. Around 1975, I was contacted by a George Klingman in Mifflinburg, and he and another fellow were trying to put together family history that they knew they had to get it down or it would be lost. And they found me, and that was one connection. And then George's partner died, and that left George. And finally, George shared with me his material, and but the last thing he said before he died was, "We still don't know who are Peter's parents." So that became a primary focus of my search. I discovered a cousin up in Duluth, Minnesota, who gave me a copy of Arthur K. Klingeman's work on a man called Hans George Klingeman. That was his lineage, and I thought it would perhaps was ours because our Hans George, when he came, arrived with an 8-year-old son named Petter. So everybody thought surely Petter was our family. But when I got into this history study, I discovered that Petter disappeared. We think he died in the Indian Wars. And true to German tradition, whenever a son dies, the next son receives the same name. So in fact, Hans George's family did succeed to another son named Peter, but it wasn't our Peter. So I continued looking. And that's when, but I noticed in the Arthur K. Klingeman book on Hans George family that he had a list of baptisms from the Trinity Lutheran Church in Reading, and there were a whole number of brothers listed. that was a very interesting thing to see. And at some point, I was encouraged. Betty Cox showed up. She was a family member in Casper, Wyoming, Betty Klingman Cox, and she had begun doing a lot of genealogical work, and she sent me 4 or 5 wills that she had gotten from the Reading courthouse. I didn't recognize any of them as being important to the family, although I remember one will struck me, and it was the one where the man left his widow, among other things, her bed, her bedstead, and a cow. I thought, how strange. Well, it turns out that was actually our ancestor. And when I went to Reading Courthouse and I asked for the will of Philip Klingman, in 2 minutes they laid the original on my hands, and there it was. And I made copies of it and have worked on it very soon. In this will, Philip Klingman names all of 9 of his children. And there were the same names that I saw in that baptismal list in Arthur K. Klingman's list from the Reading Lutheran Church. And they were all sponsoring each other's children, which is a very strong family tie. And there also was the name of Michael. And Betty Klingman had told me that these 3 brothers, John, Jacob, and Peter, had a half-brother named John Michael, but we can't somehow find a way to connect him. And so we have been working, among other things, to try and prove that John Michael was in the family. And sometime around in the early 70s, or middle 70s, one of the pastors in Billings, named Frank Klingman, spelled with a C, had a terrible car accident. And I went to call on him, partly because of his name, but also because of the fact that he was a pastor. And when he got better, he had been terribly, terribly injured. And when he got better, he said to me, "Vern, do you know how I know we're cousins?" And I said, "No, how do you know we're cousins?" He said, "The first time you came to visit me, and when you got up to walk away, I almost fainted." And I said, "Fainted?" He said, "Yes. Every body motion that you make is that of my father. You were exactly like my father walking out of that room." And so I got in touch with this family, and this is the John Michael Klingman family. So I got in touch with Gordon Klingman, who was doing some of their history, and I bet him that a steak dinner that we were cousins. Well, about that time, he had started doing a DNA test to see if they were related to a particular Jacob Klingman, who had a Jacob Klingman immigrate to America, and Gordon thought maybe that was our ancestor. Well, I paid my $250 and joined that DNA test, and when the test came back, it proved that the Jacob Klingman connection was not there except back 100 generations, which would have made it about the time of Moses. And we did have family ties in Germany at that point. But it also proved that of Gordon himself and of Warren, both who could prove that they were direct descendants of John Michael, and then myself, I could prove I was a direct descendant from Peter, and that we had identical male markers, which is what is true of the DNA test, which proved that we shared the same common ancestry back 7 generations, and that is Philip Klingman. So this proved that John Michael was the half-brother born in the family. A little bit about Peter Klingman, born about 1752. We do not know yet what his induction dates were in the Revolutionary Army, but we do know that he crossed the Delaware with Washington in 1776 and won the Battle of Trenton, which was the first time that the Revolutionary Army had won anything. And then they chased the Redcoats up to Princeton, and that's where Peter got shot and froze his feet. Because of this circumstance, there was so little medical care for these people anyway, so he was on his own. We have no knowledge at all who he stayed with to heal up from his wound, nor We do know that he bound his feet in toe cloth and made some homemade crutches so he could walk. And it took him 2.5 months going as a rebel in Tory territory to get to his home. And we finally found out that home was at Reading, PA, at the Plough Inn south of Reading. I had been searching I had interpreted the word Plowville. It was written with a big flourish. I thought it was Slowville. And I was very disappointed in the Reading Historical Society at one point. I was getting ready to leave, and a young man came to me and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, yes, I guess so. I'm about to leave." And I said, "Where is Slowville?" And he says, "Let me see your documents." So he looked at it and he says, "I don't think that's Slowville. I think that's Plowville." And I said, "Well, where is it?" And he said, "It's 8 miles south of Reading." So I got in my car immediately and went there, and that was the beginning of developing all of this final discussion of the whole family ties. So in the year 2001, I persuaded my family, who does a reunion every 3 years, and 86 Klingman showed up at Plough Inn, and we installed a bronze historic marker on Plough Inn, which is still there. It's 200 years old. It was built probably, I should explain that when Philip Klingman arrived, he arrived in 1743, but around 1750, he built Plough Inn out of logs halfway between Reading and the turnpike on the highest hill. And he got rich from it. He built a huge red barn, which is still standing, and then he replaced the log inn by this beautiful stone inn that's still standing and serving as a condominium for several families that live there. And so we had that wonderful retreat and family gathering at Plowville, and we have pictures of it, which we'll show you in the material that we're printing. And now let me talk about a couple of personal stories. I grew up as the youngest member of my family, and my mother had a strong premonition of death in my birth, and so she had arranged for my oldest sister, who was all of 16 or 17 by that time, to raise me. Well, actually, my mom came through it fine, and my family says that I was the baby of the family and my mother's pet. And I don't know that that's so, but it was a delightful thing growing up in that family. I idolized my older brothers when they went to college. My oldest brother, Gail, was ready to go to college in 1929 when my father had his arm cut off in a combine accident, and then the market broke in the fall of 1929, so Gail stayed an extra year at home, so he was home 2 years working to save enough money to go to college. And then he went to college and proved to all of us that you could do it. So every member of our family went to college and worked their way through school. Well, when Gail and Dayton came home from college one year, they were teaching me a song that was being sung by all the college kids at the time. This is the Dirty 30s, and the horrible depression, which began in the 29, was really awful. And they had taken an old gospel song called Hallelujah, Thine the Glory, and they had turned this into a song that goes like this. We were mucking out the horse barns when I learned this, and they told me that the way you sing good is you sing loud. And it went like this. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a hand to revive us again. So I went to the house and I asked for some bread, and the lady said, bum bum, the baker is dead. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a hand to revive us again. Well, I learned this song, and boy, I sang it with all my vigor. And either that night or the night following, we went to the chapel revival. It was in a big tent located right where the current chapel library is located. And the evangelist noticed that there were 3 little boys on the front row really singing out their hearts out, so he invited us up, and we were going to lead the congregation in singing. And then he announced the hymn, Hallelujah, Thine the Glory. And I said, hot dog, I know that song. So when the song started, I outsang everybody, and pretty soon everybody quit singing, and I sang the song to the end. At which point, the evangelist thanked us for singing and let us go back to our seats, and I noticed that my family were all slinking low in their seats. So that was a story that was often told against me. I remember being asked at one point at dinner table, what are you going to be when you grow up, Vernie? And I said, I'm going to be a preacher in the front yard and a cowboy in the back. And I just about turned out that way. One of the amazing things was that every Sunday afternoon during the summertime, we would be working very hard in the fields all during the week. But after church, we'd come home and most often strike out for swimming holes. It was in the Lodgepole Creek or the South Platte River or irrigation ditches. One time, we were swimming at what's called Red Bridge. It's where the Lodgepole Creek crosses the road just west of Chapel. And there had been a heavy storm, so the water was rushing through the culvert. And Glenn, Dayton, and Gail would all put me on their shoulder and get out in front of that heavy water going through the culvert and carry me across and drop me off at the other side. Well, finally they got tired of doing it. And they put me down in the shallow water and said, stay out here in the shallow water. Well, wouldn't you know, I started going for the deep water, and next thing I know, I was in the bottom of that hole, this big mud hole, and I was scrambling for everything I could. I remember I couldn't see anything. And suddenly I got my fingers tangled up in fishing line. And Pike Owens was fishing off of the east side of the pool, and he pulled me up and saved my life. And he quickly got his fish hooks out of my hand. That was his main concern. Nobody else paid any attention to the fact that he saved my life. And so that's the story of how I survived our swimming hole. When school started in 1935, I was 9 years old and I was in the 5th grade. And I came down with polio and also a terrible pain in the center, that hollow center of your chest, and it was called leakage of the heart valves. And there was no cure or care for any of this thing, so what the doctor prescribed was 6 months of complete bed rest, and I wasn't allowed to do anything for 6 months, and then I was prohibited from any sports for 3 years. I could work my head off on the farm, but I couldn't do sports. So that ultimately, as a result, while I had lost my left arm and my right leg, everything healed back up and ultimately rebuilt, excepting the deltoid muscle in my left shoulder. So when World War II came along and they needed cannon fodder, they tested me and they couldn't find a thing wrong with me, so I volunteered for the Navy, and I was assigned to help commission a ship called the USS Bristol out of San Pedro and San Diego, and we went to war on that ship. I fired 20mm cannon off of the fantail as an anti-aircraft and anti-personnel, but I also was working for the raid as a radar man. We spent considerable time escorting the USS Wasp, which was a gigantic aircraft carrier, and also during the Okinawa troubles, we had our bow torn off, and we were back in Guam getting repaired when President Truman thankfully dropped the A-bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, mind you, we killed more people in Okinawa than we ever killed in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but it wasn't so dramatic, and we killed an awful lot of Americans in the course of doing it. But the result of this was that the Japanese surrendered, and it saved us the horrible invasion of Japan, which would have killed 10 million of them and 1 million more of us. So I'm always thankful for President Truman dropping that bomb, and when people object to it, I like to give this counter historical information. We were then we were repaired and back to Japan for occupation duty for 6 months, and we were assigned to pacify the inland sea from the kamikaze boats that were there, and we were anchored at Hiroshima, and we played touch football in the nuclear dust out on the docks of Hiroshima. Nobody ever warned us that we were in danger, and people have asked me if it made me sterile, and I've said no, but all my kids shine in the dark. one of the amazing things that I want to remember is that in our family there were 9 children, and what I recall mostly was during the horrible Depression years when Franklin Roosevelt set up the various kinds of groups to try and save ourselves from terrible things. But everybody in our family worked their head off. We usually milked about 15 or 20 cows. We ran about a herd of 20 horses and about 200 or 300 sheep, and lots of cattle for other things. And as a child, I was assigned the summer herding responsibility. And I had a dog, and I would herd all those cows and sheep and horses out on some of the volunteer wheat so that they could be pastured and be fed and be getting fat on good food. But I had to keep them off of the new wheat and keep them out of the new corn. And we didn't have tractors in my earliest years, and I can remember that my brothers, Gail, Dayton, Glenn, and Harold especially, they would handle teams of 6 horses pulling these huge go-dig things on row crop, corn and sorghum, and it was in the hot summer sun, and there were little green bees everywhere. And I remember that my brothers would hang towels around their neck and have it tied up inside their caps to try and fight off the bees. And we didn't know of anything like mosquito repellent or anything. I don't know there was anything like that. But I remember often taking a midday or mid-afternoon lunch and refreshment out to my brothers and watching them in this kind of work with 6 horses. Each team had 6 horses pulling all of this equipment. And the hard work on the farm, it just cannot be talked about enough, because it was really a laborious, terrible, hard job of working. But we all did our part, and we all did our share of the work. And then whenever the day's work was done, we would all go back in and we would milk all those cows and feed all the sheep and feed all the horses and put them away. It was really a marvelous experience, because we were all doing it. It was kind of like a great teamwork. The thing I remember about the Navy is not the terrible stuff, but all the good stuff of working with guys together in teamwork. And that's what I experienced in my childhood with these 5 brothers. Our sisters helped. Sisters never came out and worked on the farm generally. Sometimes they might drive the truck, but ordinarily they didn't come out and work on the farm. They had plenty to do in the house, taking care of feeding the rest of us and doing the things they had to do. I remember then when I came back from the war, I was in St. Louis, where I'm sitting now with Bette and Renato, and we were in the discharge center, and I was in the noon chow line waiting to go in and have dinner, and I turned around and looked, and there stood Dick Eshelman. Now, this Dick was a brother of Philip, who had married my sister Clara May. And Dick and I were both in similar ships and similar war conditions, and that we should meet each other on that same day was just amazing. So we arranged that when we got discharged finally the next day, we would get together and we rode a train back up to Lincoln, and Dick went home to Red Cloud and I went home to Chapel. And then Dick went to college at the University of Nebraska, and that's when he connected with Laura and they got married. So that was a wonderful type of family tie in the end of the war. I enrolled at the University of Denver in pre-law. And that summer, at my pastor's request, I helped to sponsor some kids at a church camp down at, I think it was at Lexington. And it was at that time that I felt the Lord laid his hand on me and called me to preach and to be an ordained pastor. And so I just continued to go to the University of Denver, but I changed from pre-law to pre-seminary. And then when I graduated, that's where I met Pat and Pat Waller, and we got married there in August of 1948. And she's been a wonderful partner in my life all through these years. We we had, I earned my, we both graduated from the University of Denver, and then I earned my master's and my doctorate degrees at our seminary, and we started campus ministry at the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado, and then I became the lead pastor of the church in Golden, and during that time the membership almost doubled, and we got into a building program. And then we went to Emmanuel Church in South Denver, where we again were there for 5 years, and we again doubled the membership and built new facilities. And that's when our bishop sent us to Billings, Montana, to First Church, and we got stuck there for 26 years, and that was when we retired, and we stayed in Billings. We have our own home, and our children are all grown and doing well. Paul was adopted. We had had a baby girl that was born and lasted about 3 or 4 days. We think probably her birth defects were from the thalidomide type of pills and the disaster that caused that. And so when she died, we immediately put in for adoption, and we adopted Paul in January of 1954. He was born in October 23 of 53. And then Nancy and Steve were born to us while we lived in South Denver. And then we moved to Billings, and that's when Candy was born to us. So we have 4 children. And then we kind of acquired 3 foster daughters. Donna came to live with us and became, she's an enrolled member of the Blackfeet tribe, but she was a priceless addition to our family. She and Candy were very close, and we had her as legal guardians for several years, and she is married to Mark Burns and living in Falls Church, and she is working with a large art institute there. Then in the end of the Kurdish Revolution of 1975, Gaziza Kanaka and Fozia Hussein showed up in Billings, and we offered them a place to stay, offered Fozia a place to stay, and she thought it was so weird that anybody would do that, so she turned us down. But she was staying with Gaziza and Gaziza's sister and her husband, and after about a week of that, she decided that our offer in Billings was a pretty good deal, so we got a phone call saying, "Does that offer still stand?" And we said, "Sure." So the next day, Fozia showed up in Billings, and she knew one English word, and the word was hi. But she was a registered nurse, and we helped get her into American nursing and became very successful with that. And she married Jabbar Elmtalab, who has his PhD in chemistry and engineering. They have 3 wonderful children. They live in Minneapolis. Although for the last 4 years, Fozia has been hired by the U.S. Army to run their hospitals back in Baghdad and Mosul, and so we're eager for her to come home soon. And Gaziza, she called up the week after Fozia came out, and she said, "Is there room for another Kurd?" And we said, "Of course." So she came the next week, and so she and Fozia stayed with us for about 6 months, and we helped get them started. Gaziza in college, and she graduated from Rocky Mountain College, and she married Steve Heller and has 2 darling daughters, Laura and Jennifer. And they divorced, but she has these 2 magnificent daughters, and she's an accountant and a civil servant in Helena. And then Laura has a baby boy named Brody. So we get to be grandparents to all these grandchildren of ours. Talk a little bit about my children. Paul, he didn't think he needed college, and so he avoided it after high school for about 4 or 5 years. But then he found out that he really had to have it, so he took up engineering and became a civil engineer, and he met and married a chemical engineer named Picheng Chen, who's Chinese, and they have 2 magnificent kids, Brian, who is now a college graduate, and Ray Lynn, who is in college in nurses training. And Paul teaches at De Anza College at Cupertino, He started that job primarily so he could be closer to his children in their finishing high school and college. So that's been very fun, very wonderful. Paul did a very special thing recently. 2 years ago, he came on a summer holiday for 2 months, and he built the foundation and floor for a gazebo that his mother's always wanted. And then last August through Christmas, he came up and took a part of his sabbatical year, and he finished building that gazebo, and we are enjoying that so much, and it was such a marvelous gift that he made for his mother especially. My daughter Nancy was born in April 23, 1955, and from the very earliest days, we knew that she was a teacher and a musician. And she became an opera singer, and she sang in Chicago and New York markets, but then had a voice break and came back to the mountain country. We think it was somehow the pollution in the air back there. And Candy, by this time, was a registered dental hygienist in Spokane, so she invited Nancy to come live with her. And then she showed Nancy how to buy a house in Spokane. So now Nancy teaches music, vocal music, and has her own studio in her house and is just doing wonderfully. Candy, she went several different colleges and then also a Bible college. And then she finally went back and earned a couple more degrees, and she realized that she had to earn more money, so she floated alone and took 2 more years of sciences so she could become a registered dental hygienist, and that's what she is working at now. About 6 or 7 years ago, she met and married Russell Mackenzie, and they have a wonderful little 5-year-old daughter, Katie, and she is now just entering school. My son Steve was born in Denver on October the 5th, 1957, and he has always been the athlete. He could not learn how to control his fast pitch in baseball, but so he never made the big leagues, but he learned how later, and now he teaches how to pitch, among other things. But he also got a degree in journalism, and that's how he met and married Janelle, who is a registered nurse. And and he made his pile working, selling refined printing to Microsoft and Phelps Dodge and US West. And then he decided he didn't want his kids and family in the big metropolis of Seattle any longer, so they moved to Eugene, Oregon about 7 or 8 years ago, and they make that their home, and they have a wonderful time there. Steve and Janelle's 2 sons are Peter, who just graduated from high school this year, and August, who is a high school junior. Both these boys were outstanding musicians and athletes. Peter is still a baseball pitcher, but also a classic musician with almost any reed instrument. August became quite a pianist, and but then when he was a high school freshman, he had some ligature problems caused by baseball, and they switched him to golf, and he immediately made the golf team and has been really knocking down some astonishing scores, helping his team to win the state tournament in the last year. He will be in the golf team this year, next year as a junior. And so he probably will be a professional golfer the rest of his life. And then Peter suffered the Tommy John injury on the pitching arm. He was pitching sometime early last June, and he felt something give, and he pitched once more and realized he had to quit. And so they examined him, and they said that the injury is such that if he never wanted to pitch, he could live the rest of his life very happily. But if he wants to pitch, he needs to have the Tommy John injury surgery. So that was done June 23, 2009, and he is doing very well. And he's planning to enroll in the Claremont Consortium of Colleges. Pitzer College is the college that he's going to be in. And he will redshirt initially in sports for a year and a half until he can resume his pitching. But he has a music scholarship there too, as well as athletic. I am so delighted that I grew up in a rural setting on a farm with a family like I had. It was so wonderful. We raised 4-H calves and showed them in all the fairs. We were on the judging teams, and I played in the clarinet in the marching band of the high school for 5 years. We just did such wonderful things with that kind of range. One of the greatest highlights of my high school year was when my brother Dayton became our agricultural teacher in the Chapel High School when I was a freshman. And Laura was a sophomore, and Alan was a senior. And he didn't let us get away with a thing. But we still got our grades, and we earned what we got. And that was such a great experience to find out that teachers are there to help you, not to harm you. And we knew that Dayton was there to try and help us. So I just love that childhood heritage, and I participated in all the musicals and all the plays, and I even won the state's public speaking contest with the Future Farmers of America one year, and I won a Best Actor award in the one-act play contest. So I had lots of exposure that way, and it was marvelous to go into a small, rural kind of setting. I just can't begin to tell you how much fun it was to grow up in that kind of a family. We still have our big family reunions every 3 years, and in the course of that, we really still get acquainted with all of our children and our nephews and nieces and their children, and then growing out of that, Bette Klingman, who married Renato Cataldo. Bette is Harold's youngest daughter, and they volunteered that we ought to try and put this whole family history down on paper, and so that's how we have come together. About a half a dozen nephews and nieces came here to St. Louis this week, and we worked hard putting together what pictures we could find and all the data that we had, and so hopefully that's going to be ready to be published. And we're real thankful that it was such a fun time. We all just enjoyed working with each other so much. What a great family this has been to enjoy. In conclusion, that means you can put your shoes on. I really enjoyed all these years of searching the family history and sharing it every chance I could. I represented the Montana American Civil Liberties Union for 3 years on the national board, and that took me into New York quarterly, and I would always finish my work there then and drive down to Princeton where Nancy was teaching, and then I'd rent a car and I'd drive over into Pennsylvania and try and check out family history. And that's how a lot of this finally came together. And I just can't begin to celebrate how much fun it's been to search this out and to make some of the discoveries, and then the privilege of working with nephews and nieces to put it together, to share it with future posterity. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. I have had such a wonderful wife in Pat Waller and we've had 4 such magnificent children, and I just love them so dearly, and their children have been so precious to us, to me. My own personal awareness of my dependence upon them, as I get older, I'm aware that I just could never have been the person I am without having had the kind of love and friendship that they have shared with me. And I'm certain that I'm not going to live forever here, but when I'm in heaven, and this record will be here, and you'll look back and say, hey, he had some great times. But I want you to also know how much I loved my wife and my children and my family, and what a wonderful joy it's been to receive their love and their care for me. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through every danger, toil and snare, I have